"You're not a real heir," Loretta said, her hand resting on the microphone. "Please don't make this difficult," her son, Mason, added. "Let's keep it civil," the attorney warned. "I'm perfectly calm," I replied, though my pulse had already steadied for battle. Inside I made a quiet promise Dad's trust addendum would speak line by notarized line. The air carried a faint smell of brewed coffee and paper ink, the kind that dries slow on legal stock. "Stay, let the documents speak first." The parish hall was bright but cold. Ceiling fans hummed above our heads, turning the silence into a low electric drum. I counted the chairs: 12, family members, 4 neighbors, 1 attorney, 1 notary. The long table at the front gleamed under fluorescent light. I had chosen the end seat close to the clock that ticked every second like a metronome of restraint. They had arranged the room as if it were a coronation. Loretta wore navy silk and pearls heavy enough to anchor a boat. Her sons flanked her like guards. When she smiled toward me, it wasn't kindness, it was control. "You can stay," she said sweetly, "but let's be clear, this reading is for direct beneficiaries only." Her words found a few nods from the cousins. I folded my hands in my lap. The folder before me stayed closed, its tab marked, "Schedule B Confidential." Dad's handwriting peeked through the edge, the loop of an old fountain pen stroke. I could almost hear his voice saying, "Times, keep it neat. Ink never lies." Asterisk. The rain outside had turned to mist by the time I reached the parking lot. The church bell above the parish hall tolled once, the sound carrying across the empty street. My car door groaned when I opened it, the cold leather reminding me of long nights balancing ledgers at my father's office. Every small sound tonight felt like an echo of unfinished business. When I was 25, Dad hired me as his assistant. He used to say, "If you understand how paper moves, you understand how people lie." I never forgot that. I spent years filing receipts, recording client checks, and noting signatures in blue, never black. The blue told him which copies were originals. He trusted me completely until Loretta arrived. She wasn't cruel at first, only certain of her charm. She'd stand beside his desk and touch his sleeve mid-sentence. By the 3rd month she had a key to the file cabinet. By the 5th I no longer had one. "Your father's getting older," she told me once. "He needs less work and more warmth." "I'm both," I said. She smiled like I was joking. After they married, the office turned into her stage. The smell of his coffee, always plain and bitter, was replaced by cinnamon and cream. The fluorescent light above his desk flickered for days before I changed the tube myself. She thanked me but told everyone else the handyman had done it. I kept quiet. I wasn't after credit, only continuity. Still, I noticed things. She moved folders, changed labels, even replaced his signature pen with one that leaked. I found it in the trash. The same day I discovered the trust file missing its original envelope. Only the photocopy remained. That night I called Martin Cho, Dad's accountant. His voice was steady as always. "Martin," I said. "The trust ledger, have you backed it up?" "Twice," he answered. "And off-site." "Why?" "Because Loretta's reorganizing." He sighed. "That's not her place." "Don't worry, Evelyn. Dates can't be rewritten." 2 days later she told me I was no longer needed. Dad looked apologetic but tired. "It's just for a while," he said. "You deserve rest." "I deserve respect," I wanted to say, but I only nodded. That was 3 years before he died. When the call came, Loretta sounded rehearsed. "Your father passed peacefully. We'll handle the paperwork." Her tone made grief sound like a business memo. I thanked her and hung up. That night I opened my desk drawer and found the one thing she hadn't taken, the envelope Dad had signed years before. The top corner still smelled faintly of his cologne, cedar, and aftershave. Inside were 2 documents, a trust creation letter and a notarized addendum labeled Schedule B. The notary stamp bore Samuel Pike's initials and a date months before the wedding. My breath caught. I called Martin again. "Martin, I need to know if the ledger still lists the Schedule B trust." He hesitated. "It does. But only I can verify it. You'll need counsel. I have Dana's number. She handled Dad's property sales years ago." "Good," he said. "Keep the originals safe. Don't email copies. Bring them in person when it's time." He was right. Some things shouldn't travel by cloud or flash drive. I put the papers in a safety envelope and tucked it inside a legal pad binder under grocery receipts and parking stubs. Every few weeks I checked the seal. Paper doesn't ask for attention, but it remembers when you give it. Months passed before the estate reading was scheduled. Loretta delayed it twice, first citing holiday travel, then pending valuations. I waited. My calm made her uneasy. She wanted a scene, but I'd already learned that silence has more weight than shouting. When the invitation finally came, I almost laughed. It wasn't a letter but a printed email from her assistant: Times estate reading and distribution ceremony, formal attire preferred, ceremony. As if dignity could be staged. The day before the reading, I stopped by Martin's office. The air smelled of toner and fresh coffee. He greeted me with that familiar half-smile. "You still keep your own copies?" he asked. "Always." He opened a drawer and slid out a small blue notebook. "This is the fiduciary ledger," he said. "Every transfer, every accrual. The Schedule B entries are intact. The notary timestamp is clear. Can you attend tomorrow?" I asked. He hesitated. "Officially I shouldn't. But unofficially I can sit in the back. That's all I need." Before I left, he handed me a plain envelope. "In case anyone questions authenticity, this will help." Inside was a printed bank slip showing the trust account's interest summary, steady growth untouched. My name wasn't visible, but the account code matched the one in the addendum. Proof enough to start the conversation. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain had started again, tapping against the kitchen window. The fridge hummed its low, steady note. I thought of Dad sitting at this same table years ago, aligning every check stub, insisting that even grief should be organized. He believed the written word carried a moral weight, not just legal one. "Paper forgives nothing," he used to say. "It remembers until someone reads it aloud." I whispered back to the quiet kitchen. "Then it's almost time, Dad." The next morning I ironed my dress and packed the folder. On top I placed one sticky note: Times, read when they forget the truth. The drive to the church took 40 minutes through gray rain. Each traffic light felt like a countdown. Inside the hall I recognized the smell: first Lysol and old hymn books. Loretta was already greeting guests near the front. Her sons arranged pastries like stage props. She saw me and smiled too brightly. "You came," she said. "I was invited." "Out of respect, of course." "Respect is a habit," I said. "Not a favor." Her smile thinned. At the coffee table, Uncle Ray poured himself a cup. He looked older but solid. "Still keeping records, Evie?" "Always," I said. He nodded toward the folder. He'd be proud. He liked people who finish things right. The notary arrived next, briefcase in hand, the same Samuel Pike whose stamp marked Dad's documents. He greeted Loretta, then me. "Still organized, Miss Hart?" "Trying to be." "Good habit," he said. "Truth likes company." We took our seats as the clock struck 2. The fluorescent lights flickered again. I could feel the folder's weight on my lap, light yet immense. When Dana began reading the will, I barely listened to the division of jewelry and vehicles. Every sentence brought me closer to the one document that mattered. Loretta's voice cut through the air halfway through. "Just to clarify, Miss Whitaker, there's no Schedule B, correct?" Dana paused, eyes flicking toward me. "We'll review any supplements at the appropriate time." Loretta smiled. "Of course. I just want everything transparent." Her sons chuckled. Transparency was her favorite word, secrecy her favorite tool. I touched the envelope's edge under the table. The paper's texture felt smooth, almost alive. By the time the reading ended, my pulse had slowed. I knew the next step would expose more than money, it would measure truth against pride. The line Dad wrote in blue waited for daylight, and I would make sure the room heard it. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over Cedar Rapids. The rain began again, steady and exact, like a second hand ticking forward. It was nearly time for the addendum to speak. The lawyer, Miss Dana Whitaker, cleared her throat. "We'll begin with the primary will," she said. Her tone was neutral, rehearsed. "Per Mr. Vance's instruction, all assets related to the home, the investment accounts, and personal items are to be transferred to Mrs. Loretta Vance and her designated heirs." The words landed like glass breaking underwater, soft then final. Loretta dabbed her cheek with a tissue she didn't need. "He wanted peace," she whispered. Across the table, Uncle Ray shifted. He was my father's brother-in-law, retired electrician, his palms rough and honest. He didn't speak, but his eyes flicked toward the sealed folder beside me. I caught it, the quiet question of whether I'd use it. I thought of every time I'd been told to let things go and every time I hadn't. I had spent 20 years organizing Dad's files, updating ledgers, cross-checking account statements. The day Loretta took over his office, I walked out without a word, but I didn't leave empty-handed. I had one original letter from the trust officer dated 2 years before the wedding. It bore Dad's signature, notarized and filed, proof of an intention that couldn't be erased by charm or remarriage. "Any questions before we proceed?" the attorney asked. Loretta lifted her hand. "I'd like to confirm that Evelyn is aware she's not listed in this document." "I'm aware," I said. My voice didn't waver. "Good. We don't want misunderstandings. He cared for you, of course, but financially, he preferred clarity," I finished. "And he wrote it down." The fluorescent light flickered once. Mason shifted in his chair. The notary adjusted his glasses and looked at the folder I'd placed in front of me. Miss Whitaker hesitated, then said softly, "We will also acknowledge that certain supplemental materials may be reviewed upon request." Loretta's lips curved. "Unnecessary," she said. "Everything relevant is here." That word, times relevant, times pressed against the back of my throat. I had spent months defining it for myself. Relevant meant signed, dated, witnessed, and stored. Relevant meant times Schedule B***. I took a slow breath, feeling the cool wood edge of the table against my palms. My reflection stared back from the polished surface, composed but determined. Microzoom filled the moment. The clock's ticks slid beneath the room's murmurs. The attorney's pen hovered midair. Loretta's perfume powder and lilac sat thick around her. I straightened the folder, aligning its edges with the grain of the table. "I'll wait for the addendum section," I said. Loretta blinked. "There's no addendum." "There is," I answered. "It's dated before your wedding anniversary." The sound of the ceiling fan deepened as if the air itself leaned in. Dana's expression didn't change, but she reached for her binder. "We can confirm," she said. Loretta's sons exchanged looks. Mason whispered, "She's bluffing." Uncle Ray exhaled a small breath, somewhere between relief and disbelief. The notary opened his ledger. "If an addendum exists, it must be cross-verified with the fiduciary ledger, correct?" "Correct," Dana said. "And any schedule labeled confidential remains valid until proven superseded." Loretta laughed lightly. "You all love your papers. I prefer what's in the heart." Her tone was sugar-coated, but the hall had grown still. Even the coffee aroma had cooled into something stale. Dad used to say times. The heart forgets dates. The law doesn't. Asterisk. I reached into my folder and placed one sheet on the table, still folded, stamp faintly visible. I didn't open it yet. Just let it sit there like a quiet metronome counting down to consequence. Miss Whitaker's voice softened. "We'll schedule review after this section." Loretta waved her hand. "Whatever keeps her calm." Calm wasn't a gift, it was labor. Every breath cost control. I remembered the last conversation I'd had with Dad, his hand weak but steady. He'd said, "If they ever make you feel small, read the line marked in blue. That's where your name waits." His trust officer Martin Cho had witnessed that signature. I'd invited him today quietly. He was sitting 2 rows back, pen in pocket, expression unreadable. The attorney read through the next clauses: vehicles, jewelry, residual accounts. The words blurred into background hum like the air vent above us. I kept my focus on the single sheet in front of me. The blue pen line shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light. When the reading paused, Miss Whitaker said, "We'll take a short recess before any supplemental review." Loretta rose, smoothing her skirt. "No need," she said. "We all understand what was meant." I smiled slightly. "Not all of us. Some of us prefer what was written." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Mason muttered, "She's wasting everyone's time." Uncle Ray answered, "Sometimes time's the only honest witness left." The notary closed his book. 15 minutes, he said quietly. Loretta and her sons walked toward the pastry table, laughing too loudly. The clock kept ticking behind me. I reached for my cup. The coffee had gone lukewarm. Its bitter scent mixed with Lysol from the hallway where the janitor had mopped earlier. Light from the stained glass window fell across the folder, washing the red confidential stamp in gold. Dad would have liked that, the sun finding truth on paper. I whispered, "Just a little longer, Dad. Just until the clause reads itself." The notary looked up. "Did you say something?" "Just remembering," I said. He nodded, almost kindly. "Memory's half our job." When everyone returned, the lawyer began sorting files again. I didn't open my folder yet. The timing mattered. First, they needed to believe the scene was theirs to control. Loretta leaned forward. Are we ready to conclude? I met her eyes. Not yet, we haven't reached Schedule B. The hall fell quiet again. Miss Whitaker's pen stopped midair. Schedule B, Mason repeated. The confidential schedule attached to the trust instrument, I said evenly. Dated and notarized. Loretta's laugh this time was sharper. That folder's empty. We'll see, I said. The mantel clock struck once 3 o'clock exactly. Its echo lingered across the hall. Miss Whitaker closed the main file. For the record, we'll review any supplemental documentation at the next session, she said. Loretta forced a smile. Fine. Next week then. I gathered my folder, feeling the paper's edge cool against my fingertips. Each sound, the scrape of chairs, the low buzz of the vent, seemed to count with me. They thought I'd leave defeated. I didn't. I walked out with proof sealed in ink in time. If boundaries matter to you, keep listening. Chapter 2 reads the first clause. The afternoon light faded to a dull gray by the time everyone returned from recess. The hall smelled faintly of pastry, sugar, and cooling coffee. Loretta's laughter echoed too brightly for the occasion. Her pearls clinked as she leaned close to the lawyer. Her sons whispered near the pastry table, watching me like guards measuring the distance between mercy and pride. When the attorney called the room back to order, the chatter thinned. Dana's calm voice filled the air. Before we close, I understand there may be a supplemental document for consideration. Loretta's hand flew up. There isn't. My husband simplified everything before he passed. I waited. The notary cleared his throat, eyes shifting toward me. The mantel clock behind us ticked steadily, its rhythm cutting through the tension. I could feel every eye turning my way. Dana nodded once. Miss Hart, you indicated a possible Schedule B attachment. Yes, I said. Dated 2 months before the wedding, notarized by Mr. Pike. Loretta laughed softly. Oh, Evelyn. That's ancient history. We're talking about the final times documents. The trust itself defines the addendum as permanent, I replied. It's not a draft. The notary spoke for the first time. If she has a stamped copy, we can log it for verification. Loretta waved her manicured hand. No need to waste time. Dana's tone sharpened. With respect, Mrs. Vance, we do need to verify dates. It's standard procedure. The air stilled. I placed the folder on the table and slid the sealed envelope forward. Its red stamp caught the light. No one spoke as the attorney picked it up. She ran her finger along the fold, inspecting the seal. You understand, she said to me quietly, this becomes part of record once opened. I understand, I said. Loretta crossed her arms. This is absurd. He would have told me. I met her gaze. He did tell someone, his accountant. The ledger will confirm it. The room murmured. A cousin coughed nervously. The scent of brewed coffee turned sharp and burnt. Microzoom began to unfold. Parish Hall, fluorescent lights humming above us. I slid the sealed envelope across the table. If they bluff, the timestamp won't. My hands cooled. My voice held. Please note Schedule B, I said. The notary leaned in, adjusting his glasses. Seal is unbroken. Stamp date April 21st, 10 years ago. Dana nodded slowly. Before the marriage license, she confirmed. Loretta's smile faltered. That means nothing. People change their minds. Paper remembers when memory doesn't, the notary said quietly. Her sons exchanged glances. Mason stepped forward. So what's inside? We'll know soon, Dana replied. She broke the seal carefully and unfolded the document. The sound of tearing paper felt louder than any voice. For a moment, only the rustle of pages filled the hall. Then Dana read a line under her breath and stopped. She looked at Loretta. Then at me. Miss Hart, she said, this identifies you as primary beneficiary of a separate trust. Gasps scattered around the room. Loretta's cheeks reddened. That's impossible. He would never exclude us. It doesn't exclude you, Dana said evenly. It sets aside a parallel fund under separate administration. It states that if any of Mr. Vance's direct heirs, she glanced toward me, are omitted from the estate for any reason, the Schedule B trust activates automatically. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Uncle Ray whispered. He covered his bases. Loretta took a step back, voice trembling. This is a trick. You forged this. The notary lifted his ledger. My seal appears on this page and in my record book. April 21st, notarized at Cedar First Bank. Witness Martin Cho, CPA. Every head turned toward the back row. Martin stood quiet as a shadow. He adjusted his glasses and nodded once. Would you like to contest the authenticity? Dana asked Loretta. Loretta hesitated, her mouth parting without sound. I'll need time to review. You'll have it, Dana said. But for now, this addendum stands as valid under Iowa trust law. The fiduciary ledger will be requested for verification. Loretta's face stiffened. Her son Mason muttered. We'll challenge it. Of course, I said. Just bring your proof of amendment. Oh wait, you can't amend what you never signed. A few relatives hid smiles behind their hands. Uncle Ray coughed into his cup. The mantel clock ticked again, louder, as if to mark the turn of the hour. Loretta grabbed her purse and stood. We're not done here. No, Dana said firmly. We're not. We still have to note the fiduciary entries. Mr. Cho, can you confirm? Martin's voice carried without volume. Yes. The ledger reflects annual interest since 2015. Balance untouched. Clause intact. Dana nodded, her professionalism unbroken. Thank you. We'll file a formal confirmation at the next session. Loretta's expression cracked, pride fighting fear. So she gets everything? No, Dana answered. She gets exactly what Mr. Vance wrote. Nothing more, nothing less. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was recalibration. The power in the room had shifted without a shout. I could feel it the way a storm feels before thunder. Mason turned to me. You think this makes you better? I think it makes me documented, I said. He sneered. You always hid behind paperwork. Paper doesn't hide, I said. It just waits for its turn to speak. Uncle Ray chuckled softly. That's the truth right there. Dana began collecting the pages. We'll adjourn for verification and signatures. No further discussion until next week. Loretta tried to protest, but her voice broke halfway. The room emptied slowly, each chair scraping against the tile like punctuation. When most had left, Dana approached me. You handled yourself well, she said. I had practice, I replied. My father taught me not to argue what's already written. She smiled faintly. You know, few people respect paperwork until it saves them. Martin joined us near the table. His tie was crooked, his eyes tired but kind. You did right, he said quietly. He wanted you to have this moment. Thank you for showing up, I said. I didn't know if you would. I promised your father I'd keep the ledger honest, he replied. Promises are paperwork too, in a way. The notary closed his record book with a soft thud. We'll reconvene when verification is complete. That means next Friday. Friday, Loretta repeated, her voice thin. Fine. But this isn't over. Correct, I said. It's only recorded. Outside, thunder rolled across the gray sky. The hall windows rattled faintly. Dana packed her files, but I stayed seated, letting the sound wash over me. The smell of paper, ink, and cold air mixed like an old memory. Martin adjusted his briefcase. You'll need to secure that envelope. I can store the copy. I'll hold the original, I said. Dad would want it that way. He nodded. Then lock it somewhere dry. Time's the one thing paper fears. I know, I said. But it's on my side tonight. The rain started again, tapping against the stained glass windows. Loretta's car engine roared outside, followed by the squeal of tires. She always left too fast, even from truth. Dana turned to me before leaving. Expect their lawyer to call. Don't engage directly. Everything flows through me now. I understand. She hesitated. You're calm for someone who just inherited a storm. Storms don't scare me, I said. Ink does worse damage if you rush it. She smiled faintly and left. The hall was empty now, except for the notary stacking chairs and Uncle Ray sipping the last of the coffee. The clock ticked, the fan whirred, and the lights flickered once more. Ray looked up. Proud of you, kid. You didn't swing and you still landed the punch. I smiled. Dad said never wrestle in mud. Let them throw it first, time will dry it out. Smart man, he said. I gathered my folder and tucked the opened envelope back inside. The paper felt warmer now, as if it had exhaled after holding its secret too long. As I stepped outside, rain struck my coat in steady lines. The air smelled like wet cedar and freedom. Cars pulled away one by one until only mine remained. I looked back through the hall window. The mantel clock glowed faintly behind the glass, its hands moving with unhurried precision. For years they'd called me powerless. Tonight they saw power shaped like silence, steady, signed and witnessed. The first battle was done and the record had spoken once. Next Friday the ledger would finish the sentence. By Monday morning my phone had already rung 4 times before breakfast. The first call came from Loretta's attorney, the second from one of her sons pretending to be polite. I let them all go to voicemail. Some storms sound loudest when you don't open the door. The house felt smaller these days but quieter too. The refrigerator hummed, the window blinds clicked softly in the draft. I made coffee the way Dad liked it, plain and black, and opened the newspaper just to steady my hands. My name wasn't in print yet, but it would be soon enough. In small towns word travels faster than truth. At 10 sharp Dana called. Her tone was steady. They filed a preliminary objection. Nothing official yet, just noise. Expected, I said. They're claiming your addendum was influenced. By whom? My ghostwriter. She almost laughed. They'll argue coercion, so we'll prepare affidavits. Keep everything where it is. Don't engage them directly. I won't, I promised. After the call I walked to the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving the wood steps damp under my slippers. Across the street Mr. Kelly, my neighbor, waved from his mailbox. He'd worked construction with Dad years ago. Heard about the reading, he called. They're saying you shocked the whole room. I didn't raise my voice, I said. That's what made it shocking, he replied with a grin. Inside, the clock ticked near the mantel, same rhythm as the one at the parish hall. I thought of Loretta's face when the notary read the date aloud. It had been a quiet undoing, precise and fair. Now she'd do what people do when power slips, rewrite the scene in her favor. By noon another voicemail arrived. Her voice dripped sweetness and threat. Evelyn dear, we can settle this privately. There's no need to drag family through courts. Let's meet Wednesday at my house. Just us. No lawyers. I replayed it once, then twice. Each time the tone grew clearer, coaxing wrapped around condescension. I called Dana back. She wants a private meeting, I said. Decline, Dana answered instantly. If she insists, say it in one sentence, no witness, no sign. Repeat that. Nothing else. Understood. She'll try to corner you with sympathy. Stay anchored. You already have the truth. After lunch I visited Martin's office. The air smelled of toner and strong coffee again. He was typing when I walked in. Thought I'd see you today, he said. She's calling everyone, I replied. You'll be next. Already was, he said, smiling faintly. She asked for copies of the ledger. And I told her copies require a formal request. She hung up. He poured 2 mugs of coffee. They're rattled. When people who built power on charm meet dates and stamps, they panic. I'm calm, I said, though my pulse disagreed. Good. Let the paper talk. That's all we ever have in this line of work. He showed me the ledger page again. My father's name in neat handwriting, Martin's initials beside each annual interest note. Every number added up. At the bottom the entry from this year glowed in blue ink: Times, balance verified. Trust active until reviewed by beneficiary. Asterisk. I traced the line lightly with my fingertip. The paper felt cold but certain. This is what scared her, I said. Truth usually does, he answered. Especially when it's written. We reviewed the next steps: notarized statements, photocopies under seal, and a verification session set for Friday afternoon. They might try to delay, Martin warned. If so, don't react. Delays favor the record keeper, not the loudest voice. I'll wait, I said. I've waited 3 years already. When I returned home, Loretta's car was parked at the curb. My stomach tightened. I slowed but didn't stop until I was beside my own driveway. She stepped out in a beige coat, umbrella in hand, smile rehearsed. Evelyn, she said softly. I came to clear the air. The air's fine, I said. It's the record that's crowded. Please, she said, stepping closer. We don't need more lawyers. Your family. Your father would hate this fighting. Then maybe we shouldn't fight, I replied. Exactly. Just sign a short acknowledgement that you'll decline the trust. You can take a personal gift instead, something easier to manage. I studied her face. She truly believed charm could rewrite ink. No witness, no sign, I said. Her smile faltered. Don't be difficult. Then bring a witness. I don't need one. I'm offering kindness. I'm offering record-keeping, I said. Her tone sharpened. You'll regret humiliating me. I didn't, I said calmly. The document did. For a heartbeat, silence hung between us, broken only by a distant car horn. Then she turned abruptly, heels striking the pavement like gavel blows. This isn't over, she called. I know, I answered. That's why it's dated. She drove off, fast tires hissing through the damp street. I exhaled slowly, counting to 3 like Dad taught me. The smell of rain lingered, mixed with the faint metallic scent of the mailbox flag. I reached inside, one envelope stamped from Dana's office, confirmation of Friday's review time. Inside the house, I set the envelope beside Dad's old ledger book. The clock on the mantel ticked twice, then steadied again. Every sound felt sharper now, like the room itself was learning patience. That night I wrote a short note for myself on yellow paper. Times, if pressured again, answer only with facts and dates. Asterisk, below it I wrote times, no witness, no sign. Asterisk, I placed the note inside the trust folder just above the addendum. Sleep came slow. Dreams blurred with paperwork and voices asking for my signature. I woke at dawn, the air cool against my skin. Outside, the street lights flickered out one by one as the sun rose. I brewed coffee and opened the window slightly. The smell of wet cedar drifted in, gentle and grounding. At 8, Martin called. Just checking, he said. You all right? I'm fine, I said. She came by yesterday. He sighed. She'll keep testing. The louder she gets, the stronger your case becomes. Silence is evidence too. I can handle silence, I said. I know you can. Just don't let it turn into loneliness. You've got allies, remember? I remember, I said softly. After the call, I drove to the notary's office to confirm Friday's slot. Samuel Pike greeted me with a nod. Still standing firm, he asked. Trying to. Good. Most people crumble between first proof and final seal. Don't. You're almost there. He opened his ledger to the original page. Still looks the same to me, he said, tapping the date. Ink doesn't flinch. On the way home, sunlight broke through the clouds. The wet pavement glimmered like polished glass. For the first time in weeks, I rolled the window down and let the cool air sting my face. The town looked smaller but fairer, streets lined with honesty earned, not gifted. At home, I placed the ledger copy inside a fireproof box. The envelope with the trust addendum rested beside it. I closed the lid, gently turned the lock, and whispered the words that had become my anchor: no witness, no sign. Then I sat by the window, watching the light crawl across the room. Friday would come soon enough, and when it did, the ledger would speak louder than anyone shouting in its way. Friday arrived with the chill of late autumn, the kind that makes paper curl at the corners. I woke early, made coffee, and laid every document on the dining table in perfect order: the trust addendum, the fiduciary ledger copy, and the bank slip Martin had given me. The edges lined up like soldiers ready for quiet duty. I reread each one. Dad's handwriting in blue still held its shape, steady, practical, certain. The notary's stamp was faint but visible: April 21st, a date older than Loretta's wedding ring. The ledger balance had grown through 10 patient years. Numbers that had sat in silence would finally be allowed to speak. At 9, I drove to Dana's office downtown. The hallway smelled faintly of Lysol and printer toner. Her assistant, a young man with neat handwriting, greeted me with a soft "They're setting up for the review, Miss Hart." Inside Dana's desk was a landscape of folders and sticky notes. You brought the originals, she asked. All 3, I said, sliding the envelope across the desk. She put on her glasses. We'll make certified copies under supervision. The notary will restamp for authentication. I nodded. Loretta won't like it. That's not the goal, Dana said. The goal is truth on paper. She began assembling a binder labeled **** evidence packet, Hart Trust Review. ***, page by page. The paper's texture shifted from personal to procedural, from grief to proof. We'll start with the definitions for record, Dana explained. If the board questions authenticity, we refer to fact boxes and statutes, not opinions. Sounds like Dad's language, I said. He'd fit right in here, she smiled. All right, let's summarize what we have. She opened the first sheet. Fact box ***, trust addendum ***. A written add-on that sets terms for a separate trust. It can operate outside the main estate if properly signed and notarized. FATBUX fiduciary ledger a dated record of balances and interest kept by a trustee or accountant. Dates help confirm what happened and when. FACTBX notary timestamp a third-party time mark that helps verify when a document was signed. It doesn't decide fairness, but it confirms timing. It's definite. Dana checked the stamp against the notary's logbook. Everything matches. This is airtight. She'll still twist it, I said. Let her. We don't argue with noise, we respond with dates. By mid-morning, Martin arrived carrying a small box. He nodded toward the clerk. Backup copies. 2 sealed drives, 1 hard print, all synchronized with the ledger entries. Dana smiled. You're as methodical as she is. Blame her father, he said. He taught both of us to label our lives. He opened the box and laid out the ledger, thick with age but clear. Each column showed annual interest rates cross-verified by the bank's code. I noticed the final line again, times balance verified. Trust active until reviewed by beneficiary. Asterisk. That last phrase, Dad wrote that by hand, I said quietly. I remember, Martin replied. He said, let my daughter close the loop. Dana's assistant looked up. That's poetic for finance. It's love measured in ink, I said. The meeting began at 11 in a neutral conference room downtown. Fluorescent lights buzzed above polished oak. Loretta sat opposite us, her lawyer beside her, a man with an expensive tie and a patient smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mason stood near the window checking his phone. Loretta began before anyone else. We're here to prevent confusion, she said sweetly. Some documents may appear legitimate but lack intent. Dana replied, intent is established by language and signature. We'll review both. The notary Samuel Pike adjusted his glasses and opened his book. I have the April 21st entry right here. Mr. Vance, 2 witnesses, 1 CPA, all present. No irregularities recorded. Loretta's lawyer leaned forward. Can you prove this addendum wasn't revoked? Samuel nodded. If it had been revoked, a revocation document would exist in this ledger. There isn't one. Loretta's smile thinned. My husband trusted me implicitly. Surely you don't think he'd keep secrets? I think he kept systems, I said. They outlast sentiment. Dana turned a page in the binder. Here's the bank slip verifying the trust account. Code matches the fiduciary ledger, which predates the marriage by 4 months. Martin added quietly, I filed these records personally. Interest accrued continuously untouched. The lawyer tried another path. Miss Hart, you worked for your father at the time, correct? Yes. So it's possible you drafted this yourself, Dana answered before I could. Notarized signatures disprove that. Mr. Pike, please confirm. Samuel tapped his pen. My record shows her father's handwriting verified by fingerprint stamp. If she forged this, she'd need a time machine. The room chuckled softly except for Loretta. She gripped her handbag until the clasp squeaked. The lawyer switched tone. Be that as it may, we still question motive. Why reveal this now? Because I was invited to the reading, I said. And humiliated publicly. He shrugged. You could have approached my client privately. I wasn't offered privacy-only erasure, I said. Dana closed the binder gently. We'll submit copies for independent review. If your client wishes to challenge authenticity, she can file under Rule 602. Until then, the trust remains valid. Loretta's voice cracked. You'll ruin my reputation. No, I said softly. You're protecting that yourself. The notary marked the verification sheet with a clean blue signature. The sound of the pen against paper felt final, like the closing of a door that had been left ajar for years. We broke for lunch. The hallway buzzed with quiet chatter. I stood by the window watching rain streak the glass again. The city below looked washed clean. Martin joined me. She's cornered, he said. She'll find a way to wriggle, I replied. Then let her. Paper's patient. It'll still be here when excuses expire. Dana returned holding a copy of the verified packet. Keep this. It's your shield now. I took it carefully, feeling the slight warmth where the ink was still drying. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said. Final confirmation will be next week. That's when we read the triggering clause. The words gave me both relief and dread. The clause was the heart of it, the line Dad had written in blue. I'd seen it but never spoken it aloud. As I packed my folder, Loretta approached. "You've embarrassed me twice now," she said quietly. "No," I answered. "I've reminded you of the calendar." Her lawyer tugged her arm. "Let's go." She leaned close anyway. "He pitied you, you know. That's why he left that trust to make you feel important." "Then pity has good interest rates," I said. Her lips trembled before she turned away. Mason shot me a glare but said nothing. They left together, voices rising down the corridor until the elevator swallowed the sound. Dana exhaled. "You handled that better than most clients I've had in 20 years. "I just did what he taught me," I said. "Read what's written, not what's said." We sat a moment longer while the rain eased outside. The fluorescent light above us flickered once, then steadied. Martin gathered the ledger into his briefcase. "This chapter's almost closed," he said. "Almost," I replied. "There's still one sentence left to read." I drove home through soft drizzle. The town felt quieter, as if waiting for the final confirmation. When I reached my house, the porch smelled of damp wood and coffee grounds. I set the folder on the kitchen counter next to the clock that ticked like its cousin in the parish hall. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe fully. The paper had done its job, the truth was on record. Whatever came next would come in daylight, under oath, with witnesses and signatures. I turned off the kitchen light, the clock still ticking behind me, and whispered the same sentence that had carried me this far. "Stay, let the documents speak first." Friday arrived, gray and cold, the kind of day that made paper feel alive. I packed the folder again, trust addendum, ledger and bank slip, and whispered what Dad always said: "Don't argue the page, read it." At the courthouse, the boardroom lights buzzed softly. Dana sat beside me, Martin across, and Loretta with her lawyer at the far end. The notary, Samuel Pike, waited by the recorder, expression calm. Dana began. "This session confirms the fiduciary ledger and related records." Martin opened the book. "Entries: continuous interest accrued yearly, no tampering." Samuel compared signatures. "Ink seal and date intact, April 21, 2015. Loretta's lawyer asked, "Any chance this was revoked?" Samuel shook his head. "A revocation must appear in my ledger." "It doesn't." Loretta's voice tightened. "My husband didn't hide money from me." Martin replied evenly, "He didn't hide. He documented." Dana pointed to the clause. "The trust activates when the heir is excluded. That happened last week." Mason stood. "She manipulated him. Everyone knows she controlled his office." I kept my tone flat. "I filed his papers. He signed them himself." Loretta leaned forward. "This is pity dressed as legality." "No," I said. "It's his handwriting. Pity doesn't have a stamp." Dana nodded toward me. "Please read the key line aloud." I opened the folder, fingers brushing old ink. "If my daughter is ever removed, this trust operates as her rightful inheritance." The words landed like a quiet gavel. Nobody moved. Loretta tried to laugh. "He never said that to me." "Because he already wrote it," I said. Samuel restamped the copy, one clean strike that filled the room. "Verified," he announced. Loretta's lawyer sighed. "We'll reserve objections." "Of course," Dana said. "The record stands." Meantime, Loretta's eyes burned. "You think this makes you righteous? I think it makes me dated," I said softly. "And dates don't lie." She rose abruptly, pearls shaking. "You'll regret this." I didn't reply. Silence worked better. When they left, the air lightened. The copier hummed behind us. The smell of warm ink filled the room. Martin closed the ledger. "He'd be proud of you, Evelyn. You didn't swing first." "I didn't need to," I said. "The paper did." Dana smiled. "Justice by document, my favorite kind." Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight hit the courthouse steps like fresh paint. Reporters waited, but Dana waved them off. "No statements," she said. "Truth already spoke." We walked together to the parking lot. Samuel locked his briefcase. "Few people respect signatures until one saves them," he said. "That's what Dad taught me," I replied. Martin showed me the ledger's margin before closing it, a faint pencil note: "Times, let her have the truth, not the burden." Asterisk. I blinked hard. "He wrote that." "He meant it," Martin said. "And now it's done." At home, the fridge hummed its familiar rhythm. I laid the verified papers on the table, blue ink catching the afternoon light. Everything that mattered fit in one folder. Uncle Ray called. "Heard the news," he said. You kept your cool as always. Then you won, he replied. Noise fades. Records don't. After hanging up, I opened the window. The air smelled of rain and cedar. The clock ticked steady each second, another confirmation. Dad's photo watched from the shelf, sleeves rolled, eyes kind. You were right, Dad, I whispered. The dates spoke louder than anyone. The phone buzzed once, Loretta again. I let it ring out. Some sounds deserve silence. As the sun lowered, I made tea and reread the clause one last time. Asterisk, if my daughter is ever removed. Asterisk, it was his apology and his armor both. By dusk, calm returned. The papers lay in order, stamped, sealed, and witnessed. No speeches, no revenge, just proof and quiet dignity. The mantel clock ticked once more, echoing through the still house. Justice had landed, not with noise but with a signature. By Monday morning, the headlines had twisted everything. Asterisk, stepdaughter claims hidden fund. Asterisk, widow questions trust document. Asterisk, no article mentioned the notary or the dates, just noise meant to stir doubt. I sat at the kitchen table reading without flinching. The papers couldn't touch me. They could only talk louder than truth for a day or two. The clock on the wall ticked in steady disagreement. Dana called first. They're testing public sympathy, she said. Let them, I answered. Ink doesn't panic. You're handling this better than most, she said. But stay off comments and interviews. Let silence work. I'm good at that, I said. After she hung up, I poured another cup of coffee. The house smelled of rain and paper, a calm scent. Outside, clouds gathered again, heavy but slow. The storm always circles before it leaves. Martin came by that afternoon. He wore the same gray coat and carried the same worn briefcase. They called me too, he said. Wanted me to say your father was senile when he signed. I looked at him. And you said? I said senility doesn't line up signatures or balance ledgers. We both laughed quietly. The kind that eases the air. He laid a new copy of the ledger on the table. Final verification printed, he said. Dana will deliver it to the court clerk tomorrow. I traced the seal smooth under my fingertips. Feels heavier now. That's the weight of peace, he said. Loretta's voice had turned up everywhere, church circles, social dinners, even local radio. She told anyone willing to listen that I'd tricked an old man. I didn't respond. When lies rush, truth waits. By midweek, Mason appeared at my gate. His car idled too long in the drizzle. He leaned out the window. You're really proud of yourself, huh? I'm calm, I said. You ruined her life. She wrote her part, I said. I just read mine. He glared, engine revving, then sped off. The smell of exhaust lingered, bitter but brief. I watched it drift away like a temper that had nowhere to land. Later that night, I sat with the folder one last time. Inside was everything: Dad's handwriting, Martin's initials, Samuel's seal. The documents were quiet but alive, breathing proof with every line. I didn't feel powerful, I felt complete. Uncle Ray called around 8. They'll keep gossiping till they get tired, he said. I know. You don't owe anyone speeches. Just keep your boundary. I've written it down already, I said. He chuckled. Of course you have. After the call, I wrote a note and taped it to the inside cover of the folder. Times. Boundaries keep peace. Paper keeps memory. Asterisk. Then I turned off the light and let the clock carry the rest. By Friday, things began to shift. Dana sent a short message: Times, certification complete. Clerk filed copy. Public notice next week. Asterisk, no fanfare, just confirmation. That's how justice should arrive, quiet and undeniable. I took a walk downtown. The sidewalks still glistened from morning rain. In shop windows, reflections blurred with movement. For the first time in months, I looked at the world without flinching. Every sound: bus brakes, coffee grinders, footsteps, felt normal again. When I passed the church, the parish hall door was open. The same place where it started. Inside, the chairs were stacked, floor-polished clock still ticking above the podium. I stood in the doorway a while, listening. It no longer sounded like shame, it sounded like closure. Dad's voice came back in memory: Times. Finish things right even if no one claps. Asterisk. I smiled. I did, Dad, I whispered. As I left, I caught a faint smell of coffee and dust, the same mix from the day of the reading. Maybe justice carries its own scent. Back home, sunlight broke through the clouds. I placed the folder in the drawer with the note still taped inside. The air felt lighter. Loretta would keep talking for a while, but the record would stay the same. The ledger didn't argue, it endured. I didn't need her apology anymore, only her distance. I sat near the window, letting the breeze move the curtains. For the first time, silence felt earned. When the phone rang again, I didn't look. Some calls can wait. The clock struck 3, one steady chime, then stillness. I had learned that dignity doesn't shout, it signs, stamps, and closes the file. The courthouse smelled of dust and polished wood when I arrived Monday morning. Dana stood by the hallway window reading her notes. "It's final today," she said softly. "Certification and announcement." I nodded. No speeches. None. Just signatures and acknowledgement. Inside the chamber, a few reporters waited, pens ready but voices low. Martin sat near the front, ledger closed on his lap. The notary stood by the seal machine, precise as ever. Across the aisle, Loretta and Mason entered late. She wore black again, the color she used for sympathy. Dana whispered, "Stay still. Let the record do the work." The judge entered, a calm woman with gray hair pulled back tight. "We're here to finalize the verification of the Heart Trust addendum," she said. "All documents reviewed, all witnesses sworn." Samuel stepped forward. "I confirm the authenticity of every stamp and ledger entry. No alteration." Martin followed. "The fiduciary account matches all annual reports. Balance intact, accrued interest confirmed." Dana rose. "Under statute, the trust is valid and active. Beneficiary Evelyn Hart, effective immediately." Loretta shifted her pearls, catching light. "Your Honor, my husband never meant to divide his family." The judge replied evenly, "He meant to protect fairness. His own words say so." She lifted the addendum. "This clause ensures dignity, not division." Loretta's lawyer leaned close, whispering, but she pushed him away. "This is humiliation," she said. I met her eyes. "No. It's correction. Quiet and overdue." The judge signed the final line. The sound of pen on paper filled the room, one slow stroke sealing years of noise into stillness. "The court recognizes the Schedule B trust as binding," she declared. "All previous objections dismissed." For a moment no one breathed. Then Samuel pressed the seal down, metal against parchment, one final echo of truth. Martin smiled faintly. "There it is," he whispered. "The last signature." Loretta stood abruptly. "So she gets everything?" "No," I said. "I get what he wrote. Nothing more." Her voice cracked. "And you'll ruin his name with this." "His name is on every page," I said. "It's safe." The judge closed the file. "This hearing is adjourned." Dana placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Evelyn." "Not quite," I said. "It needs purpose." Outside cameras flashed, but Dana waved them back. I walked down the courthouse steps without stopping. Rain began again, soft, persistent, like applause no one heard. Martin caught up to me. "Where will you go now?" "Home first," I said. "Then the bank." He nodded. "You're making that grant, aren't you?" "Yes." "The Hart Community Business Fund," I said. "Dad believed second chances should be earned, not begged. This trust will keep that promise." At the bank, the manager recognized me from the papers. "You're the one with the trust case," she said quietly. "I'm the one with its responsibility," I corrected. We signed forms, updated ledgers, and established the new sub-account. Watching the teller stamp the documents, I felt an old weight leave my chest. This was the right ending, no revenge, just clarity. Later I visited the parish hall. The same place where I'd once sat silent while Loretta humiliated me. Now it was empty, chairs stacked, sunlight spilling through stained glass. The clock on the wall ticked the same way, but it sounded gentler now, like forgiveness. I stood by the table where it had all started. "You were right, Dad," I whispered. "Paper remembers until someone reads it aloud." Uncle Ray arrived halfway through my quiet ceremony. He carried a box of light bulbs and tools. "Thought I'd fix their flickering lights for free," he said. "You still working on things that aren't yours?" I teased. "Just returning a favor. Your dad helped me keep my first house. Time to pay the interest," he smiled. We replaced the bulbs together. When he turned the switch, the hall glowed bright, clear, without shadows. By evening I sat at home, window open to the cooling air. The verified trust lay on the table next to the new grant charter. Every detail lined up, names, seals, signatures. Dad's handwriting looped across the top margin, still steady, still him. The phone buzzed again, Loretta's number. I let it ring. Some endings don't need dialogue. I poured coffee and stepped onto the porch. The smell mixed with rain and cedar. Down the street, porch lights blinked on one by one. People living their lives unaware that in one small corner a wrong had quietly righted itself. The courthouse press later printed only a short note: Times, the Heart Trust verified proceeds to community grant fund. Asterisk, no scandal, no quotes, just a record. Exactly as it should be. I closed my eyes and listened. The fridge hummed, the mantel clock ticked, and the house finally sounded like peace. When the night deepened, I packed the original papers into a fireproof box, labeled it simply Times Completed. Asterisk, I placed Dad's fountain pen on top. He used to joke that ink was his way of staying alive. Tonight I believed it. Before bed, I wrote one last line in my journal: Times. Dignity isn't won, it's remembered. Asterisk. Then I turned off the lamp. Rain tapped against the window like a heartbeat, steady and final. The story that began with humiliation had ended in witness and grace. The trust had spoken, the record held, and silence, faithful as paper, had done its work. When the dust finally settled, I realized the story was never about money. It was about remembering what decency looks like when no one is clapping. Dad left more than a trust. He left a map for how to stand tall without shouting. In the weeks after the final hearing, the noise faded. No more gossip, no reporters at the gate. Loretta moved out of town quietly, leaving her name to memory and her echo to silence. Mason sent one short message: Times. I hope you use it well. Asterisk. I didn't reply, but I hoped he meant it. The Heart Community Business Fund opened that spring. The first grant went to a retired nurse starting a mobile clinic for seniors. She cried when she signed the form, saying, I thought people forgot about us. I told her they didn't. They just needed the right reminder. That day I understood what Dad wanted: not revenge but restoration. He believed dignity wasn't something you claimed, it was something you practiced in small, consistent ways. Keeping receipts. Showing up. Holding your tone when others lose theirs. At night I'd reread his handwritten notes, not because I missed the victory but because I missed the steadiness. He used to say, Times, time and truth are patient friends, they walk slower but they never lose their way. Asterisk. Now those words guide everything I do. I still keep the folder near my desk. Sometimes I open it not to prove anything but to remind myself that calm is its own form of courage. People think justice needs a microphone, but it doesn't. It just needs a record that no one can erase. This story isn't just about an inheritance, it's about boundaries. In every family there are moments when fairness collides with emotion, when keeping quiet feels like surrender. But silence, when anchored by truth, isn't weakness, it's precision. It's choosing to let facts do what anger can't. The lesson my father left me is one I now pass on. Put things in writing, speak with respect, and never confuse noise with proof. The world rewards performance, but history rewards patience. If you've ever been overlooked or doubted, remember your worth isn't measured by applause. It's measured by how well you hold your dignity when others drop theirs. Justice doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives in a folded paper, a signature, or a single line read aloud at the right moment. The parish hall still stands, clock ticking above the podium, light falling on polished wood. Every now and then I walk past and pause at the doorway. I imagine Dad's voice again, calm, steady, sure. You did fine, Evelyn. The paper spoke and you listened. I smile every time. He was right. The documents outlived the arguments, and truth, though quiet, kept perfect time. When people ask how it felt to win, I tell them it didn't feel like winning. It felt like remembering who I was supposed to be. If this story touched something familiar in you, take a moment to breathe. Maybe you faced a similar test, a time when truth had to wait its turn. At True Tales, every story reminds us that calm strength still matters, that dignity is worth defending, and that written truth can outlast any storm. Stay a little longer and listen to more stories from our Inheritance and Elder Dignity collection, where every voice finds its fairness and every quiet act leaves a mark. And if you'd like to keep walking with us through these true-hearted journeys, please subscribe to True Tales. There's always another story waiting, one that restores faith in patience, proof, and the quiet power of being right without shouting.